So I was rereading this classic paper by Mendel and I realized it is actually a really fun story. So here goes Mendel's experiments, a step-by-step story. Who? Gregor Mendel. He was an Austrian monk born in the Czech Republic in 1822 and died in 1884. Why important? He's considered the father of genetics. Before Mendel, people had no idea how genetic traits are transmitted. After Mendel, we learned how genetic traits are transmitted, and he accomplished this by performing experiments and using math to explain the results. Like a true scientist, he kept track of his results and looked for patterns. He also came up with the terms dominant and recessive. We still use these terms today, so thank you, Mendel. What did he study? He studied the sweet pea plant, also known as Pisum sativum. Why did he choose this plant? Well, number one, it was easily available. He wasn't limited by the technology of his day. In other words, he wasn't constrained by expensive equipment or complex instrumentation. Peas were just there for him to pick. Number two, they're self pollinating. In other words, the pea plants can fertilize themselves. This makes them really easy to work with because you don't have to do anything to get them to reproduce. But don't worry, they can also be cross pollinated, which is what Mendel did. And number three, pea plants have clear contrasting traits, which is another way of saying that they have obvious characteristics that are either one thing or the other. You can't be in between. For example, pea plants are either tall or dwarf, purple flowers or white flowers, smooth or wrinkled seeds, and so on. So it's easy to keep track of the traits. How did Mendel perform his experiments? Well, let's follow along step by step. Step one, he selected plants that were pure or true breeding. What does that mean? It means that the plants had a specific trait that was the same over many generations. For example, if you crossed two tall plants, all the offspring were tall. If you crossed two dwarf plants, all the offspring were dwarf. If you crossed two purple flower plants, all the offspring had purple flowers, and so on. So Mendel started with pure plants. Step two, he performed what's called a parental cross, sometimes called a P cross. So the P stands for parental. That's because the plants in this generation are the parents of the next generation. So the question is, what did he cross? Well, he crossed a tall plant with a dwarf plant. Remember, these are pure plants, so both parents must be homozygous. You'll learn why that's important later if you take genetics. Anyway, what did he find? Well, he found that all the plants were tall. Remember, he started with a tall plant and a dwarf plant. So the question is, why were all the plants tall instead of half being tall and half being dwarf? Well, think about it like this. If the tall allele or gene is represented by T and the dwarf allele is represented by T, then the tall plant has two copies of the tall allele or TT, and the dwarf plant has two copies of the dwarf allele TT. So when you cross TT with TT, all the offspring receive one copy of each chromosome with one T and one T, so every plant is a hybrid. The hybrids are tall, but they have both a T and a T. So, what will happen in the next generation when the hybrids self pollinate? Well, let's find out in step three. He took the F1 generation and let them self pollinate. So, the question is, what's the genotype of the plants that are self pollinating? Remember, they're all hybrids, so they all have one T and one T. What are the possible genotypes of their offspring? Well, there are three TT, TT, and TT. Each parent contributes one allele or one copy of the gene. And since the offspring gets one copy from each parent, the possible combinations are TT, TT, and TT. So, what are the phenotypes of these genotypes? Remember, phenotype is the observable characteristic. Genotype is the genetic makeup. So, TT is tall, TT is tall, and TT is dwarf. So the ratio of tall to dwarf is 3 to 1, or in other words, 75% tall and 25% dwarf. And that's exactly what Mendel found. This is such a cool story. It's actually a fun story once you get past all the technical terms. But remember, Mendel didn't know about genes or alleles. He actually proposed what's called the particulate hypothesis. It's a little more complicated than what we have here, but hey, at least he was thinking about it. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.